Let's talk about the human brain. I mean, it's an absolute marvel, right? An incredible tool. But what if I told you it comes with a bunch of pre-installed bugs? You know, these hidden glitches that cause us to make the same predictable mistakes over and over again. Today, we're going to dive into these mental errors, using Rolf Dobelli's fantastic book, The Art of Thinking Clearly, as our guide. We've all been there. You're an hour in, the plot makes no sense, the acting is questionable, and you know, deep down, this is a total waste of your time. But you stay. Why? I mean, the money's gone. It's not coming back. Your time is the only thing you have left to save. And yet, this irrational pull to see it through is a perfect everyday example of one of these mental glitches at work. This particular bug has a name, the sunk cost fallacy. It's that nagging little voice in your head that whispers, but you've already put so much into it. And this isn't just about bad movies, right? It's why people throw good money after bad in failing businesses, or why they stay in relationships that have clearly run their course. It's a really powerful and often pretty costly error. And here's the kicker. This isn't some random fluke. The sunk cost fallacy is just one of dozens of these predictable, systematic traps our minds just love to fall into. These aren't just mistakes, they're patterns. So what exactly is a cognitive error? Dobelli gives us a really sharp definition, a systematic deviation from logic. And the word to really focus on there is systematic. These aren't just occasional typos in our thinking. They're more like bugs that are baked right into our mental source code, constantly pulling us away from what's actually rational. All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to look at how we totally misjudge success, dig into the hidden traps in our own decisions, see why our love of a good story can actually mess with us, and then, and this is the good part, we'll get to a powerful way to actually start thinking more clearly. First up, how we think about success. We are absolutely drawn to the spotlight, right? The superstar athletes, the mega successful entrepreneurs, the authors on the bestseller list. We see all the triumphant survivors. But what we don't see are the thousands, maybe millions, who are just off stage, completely in the dark. So to unpack this, we need to talk about something called survivorship bias. And Dobelli introduces it with this fantastic, if a little morbid, piece of advice. To really understand success, you first need to go visit a few cemeteries. So let's meet Rick. Rick is surrounded by stories of rock legends. He sees them on TV, hears them on the radio, and he thinks, hey, I can do that. So he starts a band. But what Rick doesn't see, what he can't see, is the deafening silence from the millions of other people who had the exact same dream. Because for every single rock star who makes it onto that stage, there is this huge, invisible graveyard of 10,000 others who failed. Nobody's writing articles about the band that broke up after one gig. The media doesn't interview the guitarist who had to sell his favorite gear just to pay the rent. Their stories are silent, and that silence creates a wildly distorted picture of Rick's actual chances. And that's the core of it. Because success is loud and visible, and failure is quiet and hidden, we all systematically and dramatically overestimate our own odds of succeeding. That, in a nutshell, is survivorship bias. And this leads to another related trap, the swimmer's body illusion. You know, we look at professional swimmers and we think, wow, if I just follow their insane training regimen, I'll get that body. But we've got it completely backward. They don't have those amazing bodies because they swim. They are elite swimmers in the first place because they were born with bodies that are just perfectly built for the water. We confuse a factor for selection with the result. Okay, so that's how we misjudge the world out there. Now let's turn the magnifying glass inward and look at the hidden traps inside our own heads, the ones that sabotage the decisions we make every single day. Warren Buffett absolutely hits the nail on the head with this one. Our brains don't really operate like these impartial scientists, coolly weighing all the evidence. No, they act more like highly paid lawyers whose one and only job is to defend a single client, our existing beliefs. Dobelli calls this one the mother of all misconceptions, confirmation bias. It's basically our brain's default setting. We actively hunt for information that proves we're right, while we conveniently ignore, downplay, or somehow explain away any evidence that suggests we might be wrong. It's like wearing special glasses that only let in the light that you already agree with. So how on earth do you fight your brain's own default setting? Well, let's take a lesson from Charles Darwin.
He was so aware of this bias that he kept a special notebook. The second he came across an observation or a result that contradicted his theories, he forced himself to write it down, right then and there, within 30 minutes. He just knew that his brain would otherwise work to actively forget that inconvenient fact. He literally hunted for the evidence that could prove him wrong.
Okay, now let's move on to one of the most powerful and, well, seductive forces shaping our thinking: the simple power of a story. We are narrative creatures. We are absolutely wired for stories. But that wiring can be, and often is, hijacked.
Here's a perfect example. I'm going to give you 2 sentences. Which one is easier to remember? Story A. The king died, and the queen died. Okay, just facts. Or story B. The king died, and the queen died of grief. It's always B, isn't it? That tiny 3-word phrase, of grief, doesn't just add information, it adds meaning. It creates a causal link, a story our brains can latch onto.
And that right there is the story bias. We have such a deep craving for meaning that our minds automatically take the messy, random chaos of reality and weave it into a simple, coherent narrative. But here's the danger. Stories, by their very nature, have to simplify things. And in that simplification, they almost always distort the truth. And this leads us right into another problem with our love of narrative. Because, what does every good story need? It needs a main character, a hero, or maybe a villain. This is called the fundamental attribution error. We have this overwhelming tendency to blame outcomes on a person's character rather than the situation they're in. When a company succeeds, we say the CEO is a genius, and we totally ignore the lucky market conditions. When a war breaks out, we blame a single leader, and we underestimate the incredibly complex web of history and politics at play. We put a face on the story, and when we do that, we miss the bigger picture. So, we've seen how our brains misread success, fall into decision traps, and get totally mesmerized by stories. It kind of sounds a bit grim, doesn't it? So the big question is, what can we actually do about any of this? Well, the first step is to accept a pretty hard truth. You can't just decide to be perfectly rational. These cognitive errors aren't like software bugs we can just patch and fix. No, they're hardwired into our brain's operating system, sharpened over millennia of evolution. So trying to eliminate them entirely, that's probably a losing battle. And this brings us to the core solution that Dobelli offers. It's this brilliantly counterintuitive idea called via negative, which basically means the path of subtraction. The concept is surprisingly simple. Forget trying to be brilliant. Instead, just focus on systematically avoiding the most common and damaging stupid mistakes. By learning to recognize and sidestep the major fallacies like the ones we talked about, you improve your judgment not by adding more knowledge, but by taking away the errors. It's really all about getting out of your own way. You don't need some new, complex mental model to be a clearer thinker. You just need to subtract the foolishness. So the question I want to leave you with isn't, how can I be smarter? It's this. What's the first mental error you're going to try to avoid? What foolish thing will you stop doing today?